Today's video is brought to you by AlmostHeaven.com. Handcrafting at-home saunas since 1977. Want better sleep, less stress, and faster recovery? Now's the perfect time. Shop saunas, cold plunges, hybrids, and accessories. Use our exclusive code at checkout to save 5%. Link below.
Good to see you again, Bo. I'm very interested in today's topic because, in a way, this gets a nice segue in from last week's topic of suffering. And our topic today is temptation, and some people will take the temptation to avoid the suffering. I don't know if that's a good enough segue for you or not.
I love the way that you introduce that. And if you think about temptation, at its core, it is taking the easy way out. When we are seeking our purpose, we understand that part of getting there involves suffering. We choose pain in order to accept or to receive a payoff. We practice our discipline over and over and over again. When it comes to multi-sport training, we get up early in the morning, we get in a cold pool, we swim the laps. The training is the suffering, which ultimately leads us to the payoff, which is crossing the finish line. We have various aspects of life that involve suffering, but suffering is a sign that we're on the right track. And the better we are, the better off our focus is going to be. And what I mean by the better we are is that after we get in the practice of pursuing and enduring that suffering as we pursue, I don't want to say the easier it is it's going to be, but the more we train our minds, we train our bodies, we train our outlooks on just seeing it as part of the process. And what we want to avoid at all costs is falling for that temptation, because taking the easy way out may feel right in the moment because it allows us to temporarily avoid that suffering, that pain, whatever it is, the feel of the cold water early in the morning. And I'm just not going to swim today. Well, we're tempted and we take the easy way out, but it almost always certainly is going to lead to regret, because in the moment we decided to say, well, I don't really want to do this today, so I'm tempted to sit this one out. And we do not stay committed. Our focus becomes less and less, and then our desire, which really is leading us to begin with, becomes damaged in the overall grand scheme of us pursuing what it is we want most. So it's really trading the urgent for what's most important. And that's falling for that temptation of taking the easy way out. So really the question is, how do we stay committed even when we feel like giving up, when we do not feel like suffering one more moment?
Yeah, in life, there are no shortcuts. We must, like you say, stay the course. And the whole idea of temptation does have a negative connotation, but I'm almost encouraged by temptation because it's an opportunity to define your character.
Yeah, it is. That's assuming that we're able to successfully overcome that temptation, because character is who you are when no one is watching. And you think about that. You're going to do the things that you believe in and that you are convicted in most, even when no one is watching you. Character is what matters most, because you can fool anyone for a moment. And you think about politicians along the course of an election as they are campaigning, they give speeches from platforms promising big and bold and great things. And, you always kind of question, are they really able to execute on what it is they're promising? And some do, some don't. But unfortunately, we live in a society of immediate gratification. And a lot of times, Dave, we run into people that will say whatever they have to to achieve whatever it is they want. And that is not defining good character. And it's not a good example for young, impressionable minds. So assuming that we are able to overcome our temptations, stick to our guns, stay the course, do what it is we most believe in, even when no one is watching, we will absolutely arrive at our purpose, and our character will be further defined by integrity.
So you said it there. It's a good example of exhibiting your character if you're able to avoid those temptations. So what action steps can we take, whether it's a mental checklist? What can we do to avoid these temptations or prepare ourselves to avoid these temptations?
Sure, absolutely. And so I think I would answer that question with the simple term of guardrails. Okay, so picture in your mind a road trip, and you're driving down the highway, and let's just say in your neck of the woods in Spokane, which is beautiful country, mountains all around. And let's just take a particular stretch of the highway where you are driving through the mountains and you are surrounded on both sides by guardrails on the side of the road. Now, if you're driving down the highway and something goes wrong and you swerve and you hit a guardrail, your car will no doubt be damaged. But you think about what the purpose of the guardrail is for. The guardrail, yes, if you hit the guardrail, you're going to suffer some damage, but you are certainly going to avoid what's on the other side of the guardrail, which in the course of this example could be falling off the mountain, which would lead to imminent death. So a guardrail is simply a measure that you implement in your life that allows you to get close, because you think about desire, okay? Temptations is born out of desire. Desires are natural, desires are healthy, but we have to be disciplined in our desires. Is that if we institute guardrails in our lives, we can get close without sabotaging our lives. Because what's on the other side of that guardrail is what we absolutely have to avoid in order to avoid a character meltdown. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm trying to think of examples for people that they can relate to. And one could be a mentor, someone could be a sponsor for someone who's going through an addiction. Who do you call? What kind of examples can someone use in a day-to-day basis if they are surrounded by multiple temptations or things that are going to say, I would really like to go over that guardrail. What is that guardrail for them?
Absolutely. So let's just use the case of accountability, okay? Because what you mentioned in the form of a mentor, that's simply inviting someone else in your life to speak openly about what it is that you are pursuing. So let's use our sport of triathlon. Once again, a sport that most would accept as one requiring many, many hours of preparation on a daily and a weekly and a monthly basis, particularly at the Ironman level. But unfortunately, most of us endurance athletes live by the if some is good, more is better mentality. So after many years of experience, we've all determined our sweet spot. How many hours per week in general do we need to put ourselves in position to compete at Ironman? Dave, for me, that magic number was between 20 and 22 hours in any given week. Now, I will say that I am tempted to do more based on the way that I'm feeling. In the middle of the summer, when it's hot, when I sweat more, my body weight is lower and endorphins are released in the course of my daily training. And when I see the way that my body looks and performs at lower weights, at more defined musculature, it tempts me to want to do more, even though I reach a level of diminishing return, where indeed more does not mean better, more actually means less. And so I have those who are in my life. I have a very close friend and mentor who's also an Ironman athlete. His name is Marcus. He's 50. Marcus is in my life for the purpose of reporting to him in my Ironman training on my weekly volume. And he has access to my Training Peaks account, and he can check in and see what my levels are, and he can call me out on it. And at first, I didn't want to listen to what it is that he was saying, because even though I invited him in from an accountability standpoint, didn't necessarily mean I had to listen. But ultimately, it started to kick in, and it's made me a better athlete. That's my guardrail. And that is an accountability partner, so that I do not continue on a path that's going to be detrimental and ultimately make my body weaker, something that I struggle with personally.
And there are other walks of life that the temptations have a great reward in terms of financial, could be personal, could be a physical return. If we want to get into stay on the athletic theme, I mean, there's people like our fallen hero Lance Armstrong, who was tempted to do what everyone else was doing and take performance enhancing drugs to maintain a certain level. And the return was, fame, money, glory, championships, and those kind of things. That is such a harder thing to avoid versus, one mentor is not going to keep a guy inside those guardrails. What other kind of suggestions can we think of or suggest?
So I'm glad you mentioned Lance Armstrong. That's a case that I wanted to bring up at some point in this conversation, and it creates a great opportunity to talk about the life cycle of a temptation. Okay, and there are 4 distinct stages that are involved with every temptation as it applies to everyday living. Every temptation, number 1, starts with a thought. Okay, and again, let's use Lance Armstrong. So the thought is, what if I take performance enhancing drugs? Okay. The thought in and of itself is harmless. All it is a thought. The second step is imagination. First step, thought. Second step, imagination. I wonder what it would be like if I took performance enhancing drugs. And then the imagination goes to aspirations of grandeur, crossing the finish line 2 minutes ahead of the peloton on a consistent basis, winning multiple tours, going faster than all the competition through the mountain stages, which ultimately we saw Lance Armstrong accomplish. Still set records of unprecedented performance. Step 2, imagination. Step 3 is justification. And by that point, the decision to act on the temptation has pretty much been made. If you're trying to justify your actions at that point, if you're justifying your thoughts because it hasn't turned into an action yet, again, we're still raising this temptation from toddler to teenager to adult to ultimately where it becomes full grown. So in the 3rd stage of the life cycle, it's justification. And in this Lance Armstrong was simply looking around him, predominantly where he was racing and training in Europe, said, well, everyone else is doing it. I mean, why not? It's part of the sport. Everyone else is doing it. And justification is having that internal dialogue on helping you become more comfortable doing with what you know deep down is not right. You think about justify is making right a lie. Justify, rationalize. Think about the word we're talking about here. It's a lie. And then the justification leads to the 4th stage in the life cycle of the temptation, and that is the action in and of itself. We now see Lance Armstrong having been stripped of all of his accolades, of his reputation, but most importantly, and unfortunately most devastating, is his character. It's gone. Everything is lost. And that's because he started with being tempted by taking a shortcut. And in the form of professional cycling, it was performance enhancing drugs. That's one example. Thinking another example in the investments business was Bernie Madoff. Okay, the Ponzi scheme. Okay, we now know the end result of that. Absolutely devastated his family, lost billions of dollars, and ultimately trust in Wall Street has become less and less and less because we see these infamous characters like Bernie Madoff existing in what is a legitimate occupation, providing a much needed service, but falling into that temptation of if some is good, more is better.
Yeah, the temptations crossing moral and ethical lines cross all walks of life, and I can see that as that easy way out. And unless you have someone there as your mental or physical guardrail, it can be a struggle.
Well, and absolutely. And let's just take this day and what lies ahead. Okay. We're going to move throughout our days for the next 12 hours. Okay. So if we can plan or visualize what lies ahead in any potential temptations, any opportunities where we may even be presented with a shortcut, if we can simply take 10 minutes before the day gets started and anticipate these potential roadblocks from a character standpoint. In other words, if we take this shortcut, could we visualize? And let's just take the life cycle of the temptation and flip it around. Okay, so let's start with the thought. Okay, where might I be tempted to take a shortcut today? Let's allow that thought to move into an imagination. If I act on that shortcut, what is the outcome going to be? Both short term, it may allow us to avoid pain, but long term, how is that going to affect us in a negative light? Moving into justification. Now, this time justification works for us. This is why I do not want to act on that temptation. And it reminds us of what's most important to us, and it allows us to stay focused on our discipline. And then the fourth step is we act by telling ourselves, by repeating in our minds, I am not going to engage in this temptation, this shortcut at 3 o'clock this afternoon when I know I'm tired, when I know that I may not want to perform my workout, or I may not want to record my video, but I'm going to choose to do it anyway, because temporary pain is going to lead me to greater meaning, greater purpose. And all this exercise allows us to avoid the temptation before it actually even happens.
As long as we know our outcome, right? The pursuit of our purpose, we know the outcome. Maybe that keeps us on the right road, and that's how I'm kind of visualizing it. It's knowing the end result before you get there, because these shortcuts are such a temporary pleasure in so many cases. You know, I have it's an interesting little quote, but I heard this back in high school, and it was from my football coach, one of my influencers. Is, you know, you start taking shortcuts, next thing you know, you start taking long cuts, and next thing you know, you're not doing it at all. And so you have to be accountable to you, even when no one's looking, like you talked about with the character. Anyways, those are my 2 cents.
I love it. I mean, that is a perfect example of what it is. We're saying on the incredible value of avoiding temptation.
Well, Bo, thank you very much. I love the guardrails metaphor and visual, and very helpful stuff on the topic of temptation, Bo.
Dave, thank you so much. I will talk to you next week.
Absolutely. All right.
Looking for a great at-home sauna at a great price? Get 5% off any indoor or outdoor sauna, cold plunge, or infrared sauna from Almost Heaven with my discount code DAVE, 5% off at checkout. For over 40 years, Almost Heaven saunas have been trusted as the top American home sauna manufacturer. Almost Heaven saunas deliver high-quality products and firmly stands behind the holistic benefits the sauna brings to your mind and your body. Again, get 5% off any order with my discount code DAVE, 5% off at almostheaven.com. There's also a direct link below this video.